about how many battery electric charging stations exist across the US, not including private stations. So publicly available battery electric charging stations across the US. So no research, no pondering, get your votes in.
Can I Google it?
That's what I just said, no.
I don't know everybody.
You said research.
You just trust the technology.
Yeah, I guess.
So if it flashes green, I voted.
18.
What's that?
Really?
Oh,
What?
Everyone get their vote in?
I think you're gonna be about right, because I see.
So I have to double click
I
now?
think so, click it once, and then once more,
There
data.
we go. Pretty good, whoops.
Oh.
There you go, back.
Do page up. There you go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we got a pretty good distribution of guesses, and the answer is 16,000. Whoops. I don't know how that happened. Can I go back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a lot more than I would have expected also, and I think there are only about 4 times as many gasoline filling stations. So when you think about how early the electric vehicle technology is, that's really a lot of charging stations.
How many are in California?
A lot.
15,000.
But there's California right there. So, next question. Which state in the US has the most battery electric vehicle charging stations per resident?
Oh, tricky.
Per resident.
Vermont always wins in these per capita
You
things.
think? No talking. Test.
So, and this isn't like the hotel I stayed in last week that had the chargers, like, I mean, just the electric outlets out in the back of the hotel. So I plugged in my fleet vehicle and.
I don't know, is that yeah, probably, it's a publicly available charging station. I don't know how they
But
count
it
it.
was, I mean, it was like literally, you know, like at your house. So.
All right, no more hard questions.
Sorry.
That might be private because it's hotel guests only, technically.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that could be too.
in fact, the answer is Vermont.
Wow.
Because
Good
it
job,
has
guys.
per resident, so we've got a really small denominator. But we are,
Well, apparently Andrea knew that one.
yeah, we're a forward-looking state. We've got about 160 and climbing. So it's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Battery electric vehicles are still an emerging technology, but they're starting to capture market share at an accelerated rate. And there's a lot of policy and economic factors besides that. So here's an introductory video. It's from Catherine Hayhoe's Global Weirding series, and you can go to YouTube if you're interested in following up. And she's got all these little, short videos on all these different topics related to climate change. She's a Texas Tech climatologist, and she's very knowledgeable in her field, but she also explains things very well, and I like her because she understands both the physical sciences and also the social sciences related to climate change, and they're both kind of interesting. So let's watch this. It's only less than 2 minutes.
Regardless of what we might think about climate change, many of us have bought into a very insidious myth about it. To care about climate change, we think, we have to be a certain type of person. If we're a green, granola-eating, Birkenstock-wearing liberal, we do. Otherwise, why bother? I do like the color green, and I've been known to eat granola. But I don't own any Birkenstocks, and I'm not a Democrat, nor a Republican, I'm Canadian. Oh, Canada! I am a Christian though, and I do go to an evangelical church where my husband is the pastor. I may not sound like the traditional type of person who cares about climate change, but I do. And what's more, I care about it precisely because of who I am. My dad is a science educator, and my grandma had a degree in science education herself. From day one, I thought that science was pretty much the coolest thing in the world. And the idea that you can use basic science to figure out how the world works, well, that's why I became an atmospheric scientist. I moved to Texas 10 years ago. And since coming here, I found myself spending a good amount of time talking to all kinds of different people, from oil field engineers to Christian college students, about why climate change matters to us and to everyone else on this planet. Climate change isn't a niche issue. that only matters to people who think or act or vote a certain way. I believe that each of us, exactly who we are, with exactly the values we already have every reason we need to care.
Thank you for watching Global Weirding. Be sure to go to globalweirdingseries.com every other Wednesday so you don't miss the new episode. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can like us on Facebook, and you can follow me on Twitter. We'll have a live discussion on both.
Okay, stop.
Trying to.
All right, so here's another video I would recommend, but it's a little too long. It's 18 minutes, so we can't watch it today. But if you want to follow up and see a good, more comprehensive introduction to what's going on globally with climate change, that's a good one. And if anyone wants me to send them this slide deck so you can have the link, I'd be happy to do that. Just send me an email message. And the next bunch of slides I just took from this video here. In fact, nothing in this whole presentation today is original. I could argue the collection or something like that is original, but everything's just available on the web. So you can get all the information you want. So one thing to keep in mind is the difference between weather and climate, and weather is much more localized and short term, sort of day to day or week to week or even month to month. And with climate, we look at long-term averages over time. It says there at least 20 to 30 years, but it can be many thousands of years. And we're going to check out a couple graphs that show some of those long-term trends. And as you can see here, there are ups and downs. So, it's possible and in fact likely to experience cold snaps and short-term type downward trends in temperature and that kind of thing. But what's been happening is that temperatures have been increasing in Vermont and pretty much everywhere else over the long term. The long-term averages are going up. And climatologists like Katharine Hayhoe have tried to tease out different variables that might be accounting for climate change. One of those could be the energy of the sun, which changes based on its own cycles from time to time. And as you can see here, the energy from the sun has actually been decreasing while the temperature of the Earth continues to rise. And here we're looking at the really long term, the last 6,000 years or so. And this is here to demonstrate that it actually looked like we were starting to slip into a new ice age very slowly over time. But that downward trend over thousands of years changed very rapidly near the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And then when you take that same graph and you overlay carbon dioxide emissions, you can see a pretty close correlation between rising CO2 at the start of the Industrial Revolution and rising global temperatures. So Katharine Hayhoe says quite rightly that the Industrial Revolution was an amazing thing for humankind. It brought untold benefits to our lives and to our society. And it's actually absolutely astonishing when you think about what we can do with fossil fuels. You could get 2 milk jugs worth of gasoline and get yourself and all your friends in a really heavy vehicle to Burlington with just that much energy. So, fossil fuels really contain a lot of energy for a small amount of density. But the result of carbon dioxide and other emissions from burning fossil fuels has dangerously affected the Earth's climate. We do have a natural blanket of heat-trapping gases around the Earth, and we need that. Without it, we'd be uninhabitably cold. But climate change has thickened that blanket. And if I remember correctly from college science classes, the sun comes into the Earth as long-wave radiation, so it gets through all those molecules in the atmosphere, but then the heat comes back as shortwave radiation and it gets blocked. So just like in a greenhouse. And that's what's happening with the carbon dioxide and other emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So, due to a combination of policy and economics, we're actually now living at the beginning of the end of the Industrial Revolution and the age of fossil fuels, which is pretty amazing. It's a really exciting time to be alive when you consider that modern civilization as we know it was pretty much built on fossil fuels, and we're starting to turn that over. So even in our lifetimes and our kids, they're just going to see really dramatic changes. Global carbon emissions are actually flattening out because of the shift away from fossil fuels, but they still remain high enough to affect the atmosphere for a long time. And even if we stopped all emissions right now, which would be impossible, the existing carbon dioxide would remain in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. That's probably an oversimplification. I think there's a sort of complicated cycle, but we have the same amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, maybe not the same molecules, because it does something with the ocean. It goes round and round that I don't quite understand. So there's really enough CO2 baked in to continue heating the Earth for quite a long time. I think it's like if we stopped everything today, we wouldn't plateau for another 30, 40 years. And of course, we're not going to stop everything today. It's going to take quite a while to, really switch over to renewable fuels. So I prepared this presentation about a month ago, and it's pretty easy to, find a lot in the newspapers. And I just picked out some things that I was reading at the time. If you look at China, which is the #1 emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, it looks like China's emissions peaked earlier than expected and earlier than the government of China said they would. And electric vehicle sales in China jumped 70% last year. That's partly due to generous government incentives. The research on electric vehicles is showing that one of the most important things we can do to increase the market share of plug-in electric vehicles is to make them competitive price-wise compared to conventional vehicles. So things like rebates tend to be very, very effective. China has reduced coal use for 3 years in a row and has scrapped plans to build more than 100 coal power plants. So the change is coming. So India, the world's #3 emitter, who's #2? Us, right? Now expected to obtain 40% of its electricity from non-fossil fuel sources by 2022, 8 years ahead of schedule. 40% is a lot, right? In a recent auction, developers of solar farms offered to sell electricity to the grid for about 50% less than what solar farms bid just 1 year earlier, and about 24% less than the average price for energy generated by coal-fired power plants. So in some parts of the world, at least, solar is getting cheaper than conventional fuels. India's Minister of Power said in April that all cars sold in the country should be electric by 2030. That's only, 17 years away? That might be a little ambitious, and, India's going to end up looking like Cuba or something. Everyone's going to fix up their old cars, but you can tell here that governments around the world are getting very serious about this. And I recently read that something like 1 million people a year in India die from air pollution related causes. So there are co-benefits too to moving away from fossil fuels, aside from trying to protect the climate. And India also has estimated they might not need any more new coal plants beyond those already under construction. So narrowing down a little bit to what's happening in Vermont, we can see a number of changes, and anyone who's around my age or even younger has been able to see some of this even in our own lifetimes, which is pretty amazing. Rising high and low temperatures, more intense storms, less snow cover. All of us skiers know that the winters are getting shorter. Rising average temperatures, more total precipitation, and shorter winters. And these have a variety of effects. Health, think about Lyme disease, for example. Nobody used to talk about that in Vermont. We got ticks all over the place. Pulled one off myself the other day, it's kind of gross. Flooding, water quality, temperature is directly related to algal blooms on Lake Champlain, so the changes in the climate are just complicating cleanup efforts, and also the increased precipitation leads to more runoff, so that's adding to the challenge of trying to get the lake cleaned up. Farms and forests are changing. Sugar maples may end up moving north, for example. Tourism, we talked about skiing, and changes in plants and animals. We've got, hog-nosed snakes in Vermont now, and we never used to see those, and they don't seem to be a problem, but some of the changes could be. So here are the average annual maximum and minimum temperatures. Once again, there are lots of short-term variations in the weather, and the temperatures might go up and down from year to year, but since about 1960 to the present, you can see that both the highs and the lows are gradually climbing in Vermont.
Are these in Celsius then? Or?
Doesn't look like it.
It says Fahrenheit above.
Right, Fahrenheit.
Oh, okay, Fahrenheit,
Yep,
thank you.
Is that Burlington or globally or?
Yeah.
I think this is all Vermont now. I think this is in statewide. So here's the average annual temperature in Vermont, steadily climbing. Annual precipitation, again, lots of variation from one year to the other, but the trend line is clearly up. And there's the ice out on Joe's Pond, so it's very non-biased reporting there. So it's kind of nice to look at that kind of thing. So we've been talking about health and environmental issues, but it's interesting also to think that climate and energy issues have important economic and national security considerations. People like our transportation secretary who used to work in homeland security type issues, they spend a lot of time thinking about worst case scenarios and what could go wrong and things like that. And one of the big vulnerabilities we've got in this country is this huge grid system. And you can have these cascading failures and that kind of thing. So moving to smaller grids and decentralized power can make us safer from domestic or foreign attack. We can avoid sending money out of state if we produce our energy locally. Renewable energy tends to be less subject to price fluctuations compared to fossil fuels. And it can also, moving to renewable fuels can reduce our entanglement with unstable regions around the world. We have some unsavory friends out there by necessity, and maybe someday we'll be able to move away from that. The US military is investing billions of dollars into hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. There are two main types of electric vehicles. You can have battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And we can talk a little more about that in a minute. Probably right now, battery electric vehicles are out in front, but fuel cell vehicles might, make a comeback. So we're just going to have to see. And if anyone doesn't know, the fuel cell vehicle, instead of carrying batteries to store the energy, they carry hydrogen, and the hydrogen goes by one side of a membrane and oxygen goes by the other side, and the different charges on the molecules end up creating an electrical charge. And one of the nice things about hydrogen is fuel cell vehicles is that they're very, very powerful. You can set up trucks and buses, which we can't really do very well right now with battery electric vehicles. So the military is quite interested in hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. They're silent with low vibration operation. They have a low heat signature, a long range. A hydrogen vehicle is going to have a little less trunk space because nothing seems to give you the bang for the buck like gasoline, but it's still pretty efficient. High power, low maintenance. You don't have exhaust systems and transmissions and things like that. And in addition, these vehicles, and this would be true of battery electric as well, they can function as mobile power sources. So they not only will drive your vehicle, but you can power all kinds of other electric supplies in the field. And you can make hydrogen from all kinds of different things. So from a military perspective, they could set up, theoretically at least, solar PV and crack water molecules in the field and produce hydrogen and keep going. So that's their concept vehicle. They took a Chevrolet Colorado and they converted it to a fuel cell vehicle. The whole back of it is this massive sort of power cell because part of the idea is to fuel other equipment. And there's video of that online too, and it's pretty interesting to watch it go. It's like any other off-road vehicle, it's just quiet. Another poll. Which sector of the economy is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the country and in Vermont? Agriculture, electrical consumption, transportation, residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use, or industrial processes. So for all of you, because we all work here, another way to phrase the question is, how does transportation stack up compared to all these other sectors? Everyone ready?
Ready?
All right.
Yeah.
All right, a lot of people guessed right. It's transportation. A pretty big slice of the pie. So that's probably the theme in this whole thing, by the way, this pie chart. And because of that, I spend a bunch of time working on climate and energy work. V-Trans has a seat at this table, and there's no way it's not going to be that way. I mean, everybody, all the policies and state law and a bunch of state laws, and for now our federal laws are to try to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And because transportation's really the largest slice of the pie, everybody's kind of looking at this sector, and everyone expects transportation agencies to be at the table and be involved in this, as I think we should be. So what are we doing? I got a few busy slides here, but not too bad. What's Vermont in general and V-Trans in particular doing to address climate change and what's coming? So we have all kinds of things going on, lots of activities by the public sector, and most of these are organized under our state comprehensive energy plan. And the CEP is prepared by the Department of Public Service in collaboration with other agencies, including V-Trans, and it is required by statute. It contains a 90 by 50 goal, which means the idea is to get 90% of our energy from renewable sources by 2050. So that's pretty ambitious. And there are various interim goals along the way, and those are also ambitious. And one of the important tasks is to replace residential, commercial, and industrial fuels with affordable, renewably produced electricity. And in addition to that, we need to replace heating oil, which wouldn't necessarily be replaced by electricity. It could be, but we can replace that with other sources like biofuels. And in Vermont, that could be wood. I might have messed up the mouse again, but wait, I'm not ready to switch. So because V-Trans is the largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont and across the nation, the other central task in converting the state's and the nation's economies to renewable energy sources involves electrifying motor vehicles. So that's really the big game right now. Vermont's a Section 177 state under the Clean Air Act, and that means that Vermont, along with about a dozen other states, has adopted California's strict vehicle emission standards. Vermont and about 8 states signed a zero emission vehicle MOU, committing these states to a coordinated action to implement each of their state zero emission vehicle programs. So collectively, these states are committed to having at least 3.3 million ZEVs on their roads by 2025, which is not very far away. And we have our own ZEV action plan that identifies strategies and actions to achieve our commitments under the multi-state agreement. And that plan sets a goal of 10% of the fleet powered by electricity by 2025. And as part of this action plan, the state will continue to lead by example by working to convert our own state fleet to zero emission vehicles. So we have 2 major responsibilities under the Comprehensive Energy Plan. V-Trans needs to reduce the climate and energy footprint of its own operations, and we're doing that. We own and operate a number of buildings and a large fleet of vehicles. We've got cars and heavy trucks alike. And we also have a big electricity bill from street lights, traffic signals, and other devices. So we need to address that, and we are working with other agencies to move the transportation sector as a whole to a more renewable system. And the big lift here, again, does involve helping to bring plug-in vehicles to Vermont. So we're into lots and lots of things, and too much to summarize here, but just to give you some examples of particulars. Our efficiency and renewable energy initiatives have resulted in cost savings for the agency, and we're probably going to continue to look for those opportunities. There's had been some changes in the net metering rule, but I'm going to be working with the Department of Public Service and other agencies to see what we can do under the new rule to continue to move to renewable energy as an agency. We completed a V-Trans solar plan with the help of a consultant, and that was finished at the end of last year. And it outlines a lot of the strategies that we would need to follow to continue to put solar PV onto our properties, and that might include highway rights of way. Let's see what else we're doing here. We use different arrangements. We can own our solar PV, or we can use third-party agreements. Wayne Davis has been working on getting park and rides converted to LED lighting. The district garages are converting their heating oil to more climate-friendly sources. I talked about the solar plan, which is at the bottom. Some other things we're doing to accelerate the market share of zero-emission vehicles. We've got level 1 charging at all new park and ride facilities, and also in retrofit projects that involve new lighting. For anyone who's not familiar with this, you can have 3 kinds of charging for electric vehicles: level 1, level 2, and then what's known as DC fast charging. Level 1 is just the plug in your wall or the plug at the bottom of a light post. It takes at least all night to fully charge an electric vehicle with level 1. It's pretty slow. Level 2 is the kind of thing that runs your clothes dryer at home. So you can have an electrician set something like that up for you, in your garage or something for a few $100. And that probably more or less halves the time it's going to take compared to level 1. So it's totally convenient for overnight charging. And then DC fast charging can be quite pricey. You have to have phase 3 power, and the more power you put into these chargers, the quicker they're going to work. So it can be 5-10 minutes or a half an hour, something like that. And most people charge at home, and they use their electric vehicle for more local trips, commuting to work, or running errands and that kind of thing. But it's important to get a network of fast chargers established for people who want to travel in their electric vehicles, and we're doing some work on that, which is item number 2 there, and that study is still underway. And we've had a little legislative involvement too. One of the things probably all of you have heard about is declining gas tax revenues, which is sort of a big deal for our agency. We have fewer vehicle miles traveled, and we have more and more fuel efficient vehicles. So between the two of those things, gas tax revenues are declining. And so one of the big questions is, well, what do we do about that? And it's a politically sensitive subject. Some people in some states, including Vermont, have started to look at electric vehicles and said, well, even though you pay your registration fees and your purchase and use tax, you're not paying any gas tax and you're using the road, so, you know, step it up. And at this point, we feel that it is inappropriate to go there with electric vehicles because there's still such a small part of the market, about 2.5% of new car sales in Vermont. And the thinking is that when electric vehicles get up to 15% of the market, they're no longer going to be considered an early or emerging technology. And then it might be appropriate to look at a more comprehensive solution. And there are lots of interesting discussions going on. People are talking about a vehicle mile travel type tax. That gets sort of tricky because then people are going to get a bill. And, you know, what if you don't pay your bill, then you end up, suspended, and it's going to turn into a kind of a mess. But it looks like the technology is there for your home electric meters to figure out whether you're using electricity on your car or something else. So you could just get an add-on to your electric bill for the electricity you're putting into your car, so you won't have a separate bill for it. And utility companies, if they're running the charger, you know, they could put an extra rate on if you're charging away from home. And then, you know, the question is what to do with chargers that aren't run by public utilities, and there are probably answers for that too. So that, you know, maybe is the way it's going to go in the long run. And just to wrap up this slide, Vermont does have an electric vehicle MOU with Quebec, and we're part of the, in addition, the New England Governors, Eastern Canadian Premiers sort of coalition of jurisdictions, and there's lots happening right now and pretty much always on trying to drive the electrification of the transportation sector forward. So some trends in zero-emission vehicles. As I said in the beginning, we'll have a mixture of battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles for a while. All the major auto manufacturers are investing in both technologies, so nobody's really sort of betting on one horse at this point. And I think the Japanese in particular are very interested in hydrogen fuel cells. They've got some charging stations in California, and I understand that east, probably between New York City and Boston. You know, a fuel cell, battery electric vehicles you can charge at home. There's no real setup cost. And there are lots of publicly available chargers that don't cost much. It costs about $1 million to set up a fuel cell charging station, and then it costs money to create the hydrogen. And, you know, who wants to do all that if there aren't a lot of fuel cells on the road, you know? And then it's one of those chicken or egg things. Who wants to buy a fuel cell vehicle if there aren't a lot of charging stations? So it's going to take a while for the hydrogen part of the automobile sector to catch, but I think it probably will eventually. So there's biofuels, which could be an important interim technology for larger vehicles like diesel trucks. ZEV registrations in Vermont have grown more than tenfold over the past 3 years. So these plug-in vehicles are now about 2.5% of new passenger vehicle registrations in Vermont. And the medium growth scenario is that ZEVs will constitute about 15% of total passenger vehicle sales. I think that's US by 2025. That might actually be Vermont. Under a medium growth scenario, Some people are forecasting sort of explosive growth, like something that happened with cell phones in Africa. So it's hard to say what's going to happen, except to say that the transportation sector is going to be electrified inevitably. It's going to happen at an accelerating rate. And then, as we said before, there's some serious efforts underway in other countries to replace internal combustion engine vehicles with zero-emission vehicles. So there's really a global economics at work here. Last poll, we've got a drag race, Tesla Model S versus a Lamborghini Hurricane. And not that it's relevant to how fast anything is, but I thought that the price of the vehicles was just sort of interesting. You can get, pretty soon, I think Tesla's working on it. It's is it the Model 3? It's this sort of everyman's Tesla. And that's $30,000 before rebates. So, and I think that has over a 200-mile range. And there is a 400,000 person wait list for the new Tesla. So there's a lot of pent-up demand for electric vehicles.
The rebates might be running out. For Tesla, there's only so many.
There are only so many.
So something like a Chevy Bolt might get you there quicker.
Right, and that's similar range, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, everyone have their vote locked in? So, all right, most people went with a Tesla, and you're right.
I've driven it, it's very fast.
Yeah. So the Tesla, ready, Colleen?
I am.
Tesla is blue and the Lamborghini's red.
Not much of a victory,
The other
The
thing
number
is,
one
they
rated
rolled it down
EV
to
Power
one
Plus
and a
motor,
half.
featuring Evo's patented 56-volt arc.
It's a Lamborghini making all the noise. I don't know what happened over the long haul. Around the quarter mile. Yeah. But maybe the Tesla just slowed down because it won already.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's it. That's what I've got. So I don't know if we got plenty